Welcome back, NSTP students. So, in this video, we are going to discuss the lesson for this day, which is Calamity and Disaster Preparedness. So, if kanina opening pa, right now, we will be discussing at least 9 different topics included in this lesson. So, let us start. Okay, the first one is defining a disaster. So earlier, we already defined what's the difference between a disaster and calamity. So for further definition, a disaster is an event. It can be either natural or man-made. So pwede siyang natural phenomenon or a disaster can also result from man-made activities. Okay? A disaster is sudden and progressive. So, most of the time, kapag merong disaster, the people or the individuals are not prepared because again, it is unexpected. Okay, a disaster impacts with such severity that the affected community has to respond by taking exceptional measures. So, uh, hindi basta-basta yung ating response to a disaster. Okay? That's why nga, the title of the lesson is contains the word prepared or preparedness. Ba? Because we cannot respond properly to a certain event or sudden event without proper preparation. Okay? So, a disaster needs an exceptional measure in order for us to respond to it properly. Okay, next. A disaster is a serious disruption of the functioning of a society. So we will it is understood na kapag merong disaster, okay, the functioning of a society is disrupted. And then, disaster also causes widespread human, material, and environmental losses. So, yung mga loss na nai-encounter natin during a disaster, uh, hindi lang humans ang affected doon. Okay? Different materials din and also environmental losses is happening when a disaster occurs. Okay, so a disaster exceeds the ability of the society to cope using its own resources. So sometimes kapag nagkakaroon ng disaster, okay, the ability of the society to cope is coming to its limit kasi nga it is an unexpected event and sometimes resources involved are not enough to supply the demands of the people and a certain place that needs help no during an event like a disaster. Okay? So, our country, the Republic of the Philippines, is oftentimes subjected to different natural disasters and calamities because we are surrounded by water. So, Philippines, if you already you remember, 'di ba, sa map, we are covered by water. So, to understand more properly the the structure no surrounding our country. So let's take a look in the disaster profile of the Republic of Philippines or RP disaster profile. Okay, this is the Philippines. Okay, so the Philippines is an archipelagic nation located in Southeast Asia. It is comprised of 7,107 islands, okay, spanning 1,840 kilometers from north to south. Okay, from north to south. The total land area of our country is 300,000 square kilometers and meron tayong mahabang coastline. Okay? So, ang coastline natin is 36,000 kilometers. The longest coastlines in the world. Okay, so our coastline is one of the longest that you will find in the whole world. Okay, our country is bounded by three large bodies of water. So, 'di ba? Sabi kanina, we are surrounded by water. So, what are they call this the water, the bodies of water surrounding our country? Okay, the first one is the South China Sea. It is located on the west and north side. So, dito siya. Okay? And then, so this is this South China Sea. The second one is the Pacific Ocean located on the east side. So this is your Pacific Ocean. And then the third one is the Celebes and coastal waters of Borneo found on the southern portion. So this is the Celebes. So as you can see, we are indeed surrounded by water. Now, the Philippines is actually situated along the two major tectonic plates of the world, namely the Eurasian and Pacific plate. So, as you can see here, this is the Eurasian plate and this is the Pacific plate. Now, the Philippines is found or located between them. Okay? And we are also part of the Ring of Fire. Okay? Now, when we say Ring of Fire, that means that the countries or the lands that are within the Ring of Fire contains volcanoes. So in our country, we actually have a total of 300 volcanoes and 22 of them are active. Okay? Average of 20 quakes per day ang na-experience natin, okay, in our country. And an average of 20 typhoons a year and being five of them being destructive. So in a year, ang average na natatanggap ng bansa natin na typhoon is total of 20 and five of them very destructive. Okay? And our country also contains a coastline of 36,289 kilometers, which is very vulnerable to tsunami. So, this is the disaster profile of our country. We are located in a position in the world that is, or in Earth, that is actually very prone to disaster and calamities. Okay, so ang mga Pilipino, we are already very adaptable, no? We adapt very fast to these types of different calamities and disasters because, yun nga, we experience it every year. Okay. So from 1970 to 2006, the annual average of direct damage to disasters range from 5 billion to 15 billion pesos. Okay? And indirect and secondary impacts further increase this cost. So, yung direct damage daw na nire-receive ng ating country will cost from 5 billion to 15 billion. So, ganun ka-expensive ang mga disaster na natatanggap ng bansa natin. Okay, the cost of direct damage is actually equivalent to more than the 0.5% of our national GDP. So when you say GDP, this is gross domestic production. Okay? So, ang GDP natin, it is actually the measure of a country's total economic production and performance. So the total direct damage, no, the cost of the direct damage of a certain disaster, okay, is actually uh, more than our annual uh, gross, they call this, is more than our GDP per every year. So therefore, we could say that disasters and calamities are actually making our the stability of our economy a little bit on the downside, no? It is a negative factor for the development of the economy. Okay? So the annual average casualties due to the natural disasters can total up to 972 per year. Okay? So annual, so every year siya. Okay, let's continue. So here is a table or graph showing the numbers of deaths, injuries, and affected persons from 1982 to 2006. Okay, so as you can see here, there is quite an increase during the 1990 to 2000. Okay, in the number of deaths, injured and affected persons. So from 1980 to 1990, it is ranging, the deaths are ranging from 5,000 plus. Ang injured natin is 19,000 plus. And the affected persons are only 13,000 uh, plus. But when 1990 came to 2000, so it increased, no, it actually doubled or tripled. And then during the 2000 until 2006, so medyo mas bumaba na siya. Okay? And then here we can see a graph showing the Calamity Fund appropriations versus the total cost of direct damage from 1991 to 2007. So, looking at this table, what can you say? This is the fund for the calamity and disaster, no? Ito yung fund natin. While the cost of the total damage caused by the calamity and disasters is on the right side. So we can see a huge difference in the appropriations and the cost of damage. So ito yung effect ng disaster and calamity sa country. Hindi sapat, no? Hindi pa nga nangalahati yung fund natin for the disasters and calamity. Hindi pa nangalahati yung fund natin para doon sa total cost of the damage that the disaster and calamities have done, no? So in here we can really see the difference in being prepared for a certain disaster and calamity. Our country is quite struggling in the money side, no, or in the funding side for these disasters. Okay, so we're done with the disaster profile of our country, and we're also done with looking at some tables that shows us the state of the funding of our country. Now let's try to look in the common types of disasters. Ano ba yung mga uh, natural phenomena and other events that we considered as a disaster? Okay, we have here the first one, very common, earthquake. Okay? Second one, so this one is nangyari, no, sa country natin last year, volcanic eruption. So, na-experience natin ito. And then, tsunami. So, thankfully, wala namang tsunami na nangyari. Another example is a tropical cyclone, either as a typhoon or a hurricane. So, in the Philippines, the common tropical cyclones are typhoons. Okay. Next is flood. So the flood and the tropical cyclone are actually like twins. If merong typhoon, susunod na ang baha at ang landslide. Okay? So these three are brothers and sisters. So always itong present in our country. Okay? So annually natin itong pinoproblema. Itong mga disaster na ito. Typhoon, flood, and landslide. Another example is bushfire or wildfire. And you also have your epidemic and the drought. Okay. So, among these three, yung dalawa ang na-experience na, no, ng mundo. So, The wildfire, one latest example for this is the bushfire in southeastern Australia. Okay, during the late 2019 and early 2020 period. So if nabalitaan ninyo doon, a lot of wildlife has been burned down, no? Maraming animals ang naapektuhan nung bushfire nila, causing death of many kangaroos also. Ayan. And the latest one among these disasters is the epidemic, or what we call right now pandemic na siya, no, the coronavirus. So you can also consider that, okay, the spread of the coronavirus can also be considered as a disaster. So international na siya, not just in one country. And then you also have the drought. So we can experience this during the summer. Okay, so those. Okay, another example is the armed conflict and civil unrest. So one latest example for this is the conflict between Israeli and Palestinians during the May of 2021. And another one is major accidents. Okay, so all of these can be considered as disaster. So hindi lang karamihan sa kanila is natural phenomena, but some of them are also caused by human actions or man-made. Okay, now let's take a look at the general effects of disaster. So, pinakauna is the loss of life. Of course, if there's a disaster, we cannot avoid casualties such as death. Another one is injury. So, if merong death, syempre meron ding mga injured. Especially if we're talking about natural phenomenon. Okay. Next, damage to and destruction of property. So if you're talking about flood, bushfire, landslide, so is included in the destruction of properties, and also to damage and subsistence of crops, no? Yan. And then we have disruption of production. So, syempre, when we experience wide range disasters, the production of a certain country is really affected. So, kasi lahat ng activities will be stopped, no? So, there's also uh, disruption of products or producing products of a certain place or country. Next is sociological and psychological after effects. So we can actually fix, no, we can fix the effects of the disasters structurally, uh, but it will always leave a crack in the psychological side of the effect, no. So, maapektuhan talaga yung mental health ng mga tao in a community or in a society. And so, affected ang sociological and psychological side. Another one, negative effect of the disaster is disruption of lifestyle. So, yun nga, di ba, the question for you in the opening video, what would you do if you will uh, have to leave your house within 5 minutes? So, doon pa lang, at the moment that you left your house during the starting of a disaster event, na-disrupt na yung inyong normal lifestyle. Okay, so that is one effect of a disaster. Next, loss of livelihood. So, if there is a disaster, kakambal niya na yung nawawala ng trabaho, yung ating other other individuals in the community. So, not all of the people are lucky enough to maintain their job. So, meron talagang cases na pwedeng mahinto ang work of the people. Next, disruption of essential services and damage to national infrastructure and disruption of government system. So, sometimes it is very difficult to receive help, no, from our government systems if they are also affected by the disaster. And the last general effect of disaster is the national economic loss. So the biggest effect is on our GDP, okay? Yung total production ng isang country. So national economic loss, the negative effect on our economic state. Okay, so in order to prevent these general effects of disaster to occur, no, what can we do to prevent this? We can be prepared. Okay? And being prepared for disaster, we call that as disaster preparedness. When we say disaster preparedness, this does not involve just the individual in a certain community. Disaster preparedness involves the whole nation, coming from the president down to uh, commoner, or down to a certain single individual included in a community or society. Okay? So when you say disaster preparedness, these are measures which enable government agencies, different organizations, communities, and individuals to respond rapidly and effectively to disaster situations. So again, we cannot maybe we can predict, no, some of the natural phenomena, and we can avoid some, but most of the time disasters are ano unexpected, so we need to prepare for the unexpected. That's why hindi lang individuals ang involved dito. We must the government agencies are also involved in this. So hindi magiging perfect yung ating pagiging prepared, no? Yung ating preparedness, it is not perfect, but we are aiming for a better response when disasters occur. So, in a form of rapid and effective response. Okay? So, what are the general disaster countermeasures? Ito yung mga countermeasures natin for the disaster. Number one, development of possible warning indicators. So, the government agencies are trying their best to put up warning signs or indicators for certain disasters. Number two, land use regulations and building regulations. So these regulations are followed to prevent natural disasters, okay, involving land and buildings. Now, next we have relocation of communities. Okay, so if kailangan na talaga, we relocate communities. And then, public awareness and education program. So, sabi nga nila, being to be prepared is to learn and be educated of what you are facing in the future. So, ayan, there is a need to educate, lalong-lalo na yung mga communities natin. So, they are the ones that will experience the direct effect of the disaster. So, dapat sila yung pinaka-prepared, no? Tayo, as an individual in a society, we must be educated, okay, of the different disasters that might occur in our area. Second, pang ilan na to? Okay. Sixth is the evacuation plans and arrangement. So, dapat meron talagang always plan for evacuation ng mga uh, communities. And then, fire prevention regulation. So, ito siya, included na ito sa ating BFP, no? So, fire prevention regulations. And then, international cooperation in information and technology sharing. Okay. Next. So, what are the Philippine approaches to disaster management? So, paano mag-approach yung ating bansa? Okay? How will our country manage disaster events? So, the PDP has identified DRRM and climate change adaptation or CCA as major cross-cutting concerns. Okay? So when we say PDP, this is actually the Philippine Disaster Plan. Okay? So yan ang ibig sabihin niya, Philippine Disaster Plan. And when you say DRRM, that is Disaster Risk Reduction Management. Okay? So the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Plan covers four thematic areas. Okay, these are the following. So we have disaster prevention and mitigation. So when you say mitigation, this is reducing or reduction. Second one, disaster preparedness. Third one, disaster response. And fourth one, disaster rehabilitation and recovery. Okay, so ito yung steps natin in managing disasters. So awareness, education, preparedness, and prediction and warning systems can reduce the disruptive impacts of a natural disaster on communities. So we can actually reduce the effect of natural disasters if we apply these four steps in managing disasters. Mitigation or reduction measures such as adoption of zoning, land use practices, and building codes are needed, however, to prevent or reduce actual damage from hazards. So we still need the support of the government agencies in doing these four steps. So let's take up the four or seven components of the disaster management. The first one is preparedness, or I mean prevention. Okay. So when you say prevention, these are actions designed to impede the occurrence of a disaster or its harmful effects on communities and key installations. When you say impede, we are hindering, okay? Or piniprevent natin. Okay, so these are actions that will actually prevent the occurrence of disasters or any harmful events on the communities. So prevention. Next, second is the mitigation. So when you say mitigation, these are programs intended to reduce the ill effects of disaster. Okay, so mitigation, yan siya, reducing, okay, the ill effects of disasters. Next, preparedness. So if you will prevent and you will reduce or mitigate, you should also be prepared. Okay? So when you say preparedness, these are measures which enable governments, organizations, communities, and individuals to respond rapidly and effectively to disaster situations. So dapat always ready yung ating mga community. So, Girl Scout and Boy Scouts dapat sila always prepared. Okay? Fourth one is disaster impact. This reminds us that the impact of disasters can vary between different types of disasters. So, marami tayong types ng disasters and not uh, all of them are the same when it comes to the impact that they cause to the community. So, syempre, the response that you will give to a certain disaster will vary depending on the impact of the type of disaster that you will face. Okay? So, magkakaiba-iba ang impact ng bawat type ng disaster sa community. So, therefore, dapat iba-iba rin ang response na binibigay mo in each type of disaster that will occur. Fifth one is response. These are measures taken immediately prior to and following disaster impact. So, yung response natin must happen immediately. Okay? To the occurrence of the disaster. The problem in our situations, most of the time, the response is very late. Okay, very late. So, response is one of the components that must be improved in our system. Kasi late yung tulong dumadating. Okay? So, ang response hindi lang sa simula. Dapat may response pa rin following the end of the disaster. Okay? So, that includes reconstruction of the communities. So, later on, you will watch a video on disaster reconstruction. The sixth component is recovery. So, this is a process by which communities and organizations are assessed in returning to their proper level of functioning following a disaster. For example dito, nagkaroon ng volcanic eruption. So, pinaalis mo na 'no, nirelocate mo na yung mga tao in a community to a different place para hindi sila maapektuhan, 'no? And then after that, pagkatapos ng volcanic eruption, magkakaroon muna ng assessment. Okay? So, if nanonood kayo ng balita, 'di ba, hindi pinapabalik agad-agad yung mga tao doon sa affected area because it is very dangerous for the community. So, kailangan ng proper assessment of the situation before the government will allow the people to return to their proper home and to their proper function, no, following the disaster. Okay, next. Seventh component is developments. So this provides the link between disaster-related activities and national development. Okay, so those are the components. Now let's go to the Philippine Disaster Management System. Okay, so your Philippine disaster management system is actually siya 'no, it is a Presidential Decree number 1566. It was approved in 1978, June 11. So ano ba yung PD 1566? Okay, within the clause ang kanyang laman is strengthening the Philippine disaster control capability and establishing the national program on community disaster preparedness. So yan yung ating Presidential Decree 1566. So this PD 1566 is established, no? It established the authority, units concerned, and process that is required to manage disasters. Ginawa itong presidential decree nito to manage disasters encountered by our country. Okay, so it actually created your national program, community disaster preparedness, and then it also created your Department of National Defense, okay, or DND. So, ayan siya. It is a response to disasters. So, let's go to the Declaration of Principles for this. So, the responsibility for the leadership in this presidential decree is rest on the provincial governor, city mayors, and municipal mayors, and also your barangay chairman, and each of them are each of them is according to the area of responsibility. So, ang leadership natin doon binibigay sa provincial governor, city mayors, municipal mayors, and barangay chairman. So, sila yung head ng ating ah, management. Okay, next. Each political and administrative subdivision of the country shall utilize all available resources in the area before they will ask no for assistance from neighboring entities or higher authority. So dapat ubusin muna yung available resource ng isang community before sila hihingi ng tulong sa iba pang higher entity or authority. Okay. The primary responsibility rests on the government agencies in the affected areas in coordination with the people themselves. So, hindi lang, they must work together So, hindi lang tayo magde-depend sa government agencies in the affected areas, but also dapat mag-coordinate din sila with the individuals found in the area. Next, self-reliance shall be developed. Okay? Self-reliance should be developed by promoting and encouraging the spirit of self-help and mutual assistance among the local officials and the constituents. So, dapat nagtutulungan yung ating officials and constituents in the Philippine Disaster Management System. So, hindi kakayanin itong management system na ito kapag officials lang ang nagwo-work. Okay? We shall not completely depend on the officials, but dapat yung constituents or yung individuals, nagtutulungan din sila. Dapat meron din tayong sense of self-help. Okay? So, in times of disasters, dapat always ready ka personally. Okay? May mga tutulong sa'yo, pero hindi naman all the time, di ba? Kasi ang rami-rami ngang affected. There are a lot of people if affected during a disaster. So, you cannot put they call this, you cannot depend on the officials lang. Dapat kayo mismo, individuals, nagtutulungan. And also, help yourself during a disaster. Okay. So, the national government exists to support the local government in times of emergencies and according to their level of assignment. All national government offices in the field shall support the operations of the local government. So, ang national government natin, their function is to support local governments. Okay. So, this is, ayan. So, meron pa pala. It is the responsibility of all government departments, bureaus, agencies, and instrumentalities to have documented plans of their emergency functions and activities. So one function also of our agencies is to provide the plan for future the emergency plan or functions and activities for future disasters. Okay. So we have here DCC Organizational Network. These are the National Disaster Coordinating Council, or it includes the NDCC, yung council natin. Okay? So, sila yung pinaka-head, and then after them, meron tayong 17 Regional Disaster Coordinating Councils. So, merong National Council, meron ding 17 Regional Councils. Followed by 81 Provincial Disaster Coordinating Councils, and followed by 113 City Disaster Coordinating Councils. And within this, we have 1,496 municipal disaster coordinating councils and 41,956 barangay disaster coordinating councils. So, ganyan karami ang council na present in our country from the national level pababa hanggang barangay level. So, ano ba, napansin ba ninyo, meron ba tayong Barangay Disaster Coordinating Councils? Yan siya. So, dapat meron. Okay. What are the common problems in disaster management? So, di ba, napag-usapan na natin paano nagmamanage ng disaster ang ating country. Now, what are the common problems that they are facing? Number one, the lack of appreciation for the disaster preparedness program by local officials themselves. Ito na. So, dito tayo, no, kahit gaano pa, even though the national level is very prepared, if hindi naman na-appreciate ng local officials themselves yung disaster management program at hindi nila pina-practice and ina-apply sa kanilang sariling community, then that is a really big problem. Okay? Second, lack of a strong and effective disaster coordinating council installed in the local government units. Okay, so if the local government units are not doing the proper job in administering the disaster or I don't know, the disaster coordinating council is not properly administering the disaster management in the local government units, then uh, wala ding preparedness na nangyayari. So ang napansin natin dito, dapat sa local government units pa lang, dapat they are the ones that must be prepared talaga, yung mga nasa provincial and local government units. Sila kasi yung nag-a-apply, nagpapasunod nung management, disaster management program. So dapat sila din yung pinakamatino doon sa ating hierarchy. Next, absence of disaster preparedness planning. So if wala kang plan for the future events of disasters, pagdating ng disaster, wala talagang mangyayaring response. Okay? Okay, next, lack of effective linkages for disaster operations. So walang connection, no? In the different bodies involved. Absence of a functional disaster operation center. Walang disaster operation center sa area ninyo, for example. So, saan pupunta yung mga tao for assist, ano, walang mag-a-assist. Okay? And then, erroneous disaster reporting and monitoring. Mali yung mga binibigay na report about the disaster, kaya maling response din yung nabibigay. Okay, so how will you stay safe during a natural disaster? Now, this one class included na rin ito in I think in the earthquake. So I think meron tayong lesson for that, but we just included it since our topic is disaster. So the first step is to cover under take cover under a sturdy table or other pieces of furniture and hold on until the shaking stops. Stay away from glass windows, outside doors and walls, and anything that could fall, such as lighting fixtures or furnitures. Stay inside until the shaking stops and it is safe to go outside. And do not use the elevators because there's a possibility for you to be trapped inside the elevators. Okay? So ito siya, I think this is for the earthquake, okay, specifically. But we included here, sinali natin siya, preparation of disaster preparedness kit. Ito na yung sagot sa tanong natin in the opening video. What will you bring during a disaster if you're given only 5 minutes? So you will experience this in your own homes kasi yan ang activity ninyo later after nitong discussion natin. You will have an activity and you will produce a disaster preparedness kit using the things found inside your home. So later on, you will watch the video explanation for the activity. So let's look forward to that. Ano kaya ang mga bagay na makikita sa bahay ninyo that you can use for your disaster preparedness kit. Okay? Okay, we have reached the final topic, which is the National Disaster Coordinating Council structure. Ano ba yung structure ng ating NDCC? Okay, let's take a look. So, when you say the NDCC, National Disaster Coordinating Council, and it is composed of the first one, syempre, ang ating president. Okay? Then, from the President, we will branch out to the National Disaster Coordinating Council or NDCC and Office of Civil Defense. So, OCD. So, dalawa yan silang pantay. Okay? NDCC and OCD. They are used to manage disasters. Okay. Now, in the NDCC side, it will branch out to Regional Disaster Coordinating Council and City Disaster Coordinating Council. Okay? And then, from the Provincial Disaster Coordinating Council, branch out tayo papuntang Municipal and Barangay Disaster Coordinating Council. And dito naman sa city, we will branch out to barangay. So, kapag Provincial Disaster Coordinating Council, dalawa yung kanyang end. Merong municipal and merong barangay. Okay? Pero kapag sa city, barangay disaster coordinating council lang yung meron. Okay, this is a table that is very specific, no? So we have here typical organization of disaster coordinating council. So let's start with the disaster coordinating council chairman, followed by the assistant or DCC assistant chairman. And then we have the disaster operations center. And then we have three staff elements. The first one is intelligence and disaster analysis. So, yan yung kanilang work, okay, for analysis of the disaster. And then the second one is for the planning of operations, so plans and operations. And the third one is for the resources. Okay? So, the plans and operations are divided to task units. So, ito na yung mga task units natin. We have the COMO and warning, the transportation, evacuation, rescue, health, the fire, police, relief, rehabilitation, and public information. Yan sila ang mga task units. Okay, so this is the National Disaster Management Center. Okay? It is when you say development or National Disaster Management Center, ayan, it is the nerve center for alert and monitoring, resource mobilization, response coordination, and information management. Ang operation niya is 24/7. Open ito ng 24/7 and it is actually managed by different bodies of personnel such as OCD personnel or ayan, and with complementation from selected NDCC member agencies such as your DSWD, DOH, AFP, DPWH, PNRC during emergency situation. So, pwedeng humingi ng tulong ang NDCC sa iba pang agencies. Okay? Now, ang core functions ng ating center is for alert and monitoring. Multi-agency operational coordination. So, for connection, no? And response resource mobilization, information management, and program coordination for operations capability upgrade. Okay, so mahirap na wala tayong tinatawag na National Disaster Management Center kasi walang magmo-monitor kung anong nangyayari, walang mag-a-alert sa individuals in a community if ano na ba ang gagawin, ano ang nangyayari, 'di ba? If wala tayong center. Okay? So, here is a video. Please watch this for reconstruction.
Natural disaster reconstruction is one of the biggest challenges facing humanity. The number of people affected and the scale of the damage is staggering. The United Nations reports that since 1980, more than 75% of the world's population has been impacted by natural disasters, causing substantial setbacks for human and economic development. Rebuilding after natural disasters is an incredibly difficult and complex task, which requires a tremendous human effort to restore affected communities. Today, there is growing recognition that we need to build resilient and sustainable infrastructure systems. Systems that not only have the capacity to adapt when disasters occur, but also continue to be used and maintained over time. We don't just want to return to normal, we want to build back better. But unfortunately, this is not always the case in reconstruction projects. Despite the hard work and good intentions of so many dedicated relief agencies, rebuilding efforts continue to be fraught with complications and challenges. consider what we learned from our research in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, a devastating natural disaster that destroyed over 1 million homes and displaced more than 4 million people across the island nation. Our research team, led by Amy Javernick-Will, Aaron Opdyke, and Matthew Koshman from the University of Colorado Boulder, studied 19 rebuilding sites in 3 different regions hardest hit by the storm. We interviewed hundreds of community members, agency workers, and government officials over a period of 3 years. We were amazed at the problems we saw. For example, abandoned housing projects, where people left because their new houses or transition shelters were too far away from water, schools, and economic opportunities. Social tensions, where new houses were not built in line with local customs, as when some families were shunned because their new houses were seen as too big and fancy, violating community norms of modesty and equality. Problems of land tenure, where people were in danger of being evicted from their new houses because the relief agency did not secure the proper land titles. Insufficient resources, where relief agencies simply ran out of money and materials to finish a housing project. Donor restrictions, like when donors specified that their money only be used for housing, which prohibited using the money for water and sanitation projects that were badly needed in the community. Degraded building materials, where supplies were used that were inadequate for local conditions. And service duplication, where multiple houses were built for the same family but by different relief agencies. All these problems hinder the development of systems and communities that are resilient and sustainable. So how do we overcome these problems for disaster reconstruction work? Well, thankfully, our research also uncovered 3 key processes that did facilitate the rebuilding of communities that were both resilient and sustainable: coordination, stakeholder participation, and training. Now, at first, these may seem like common sense, but what we found is that successful projects did them in unconventional ways. First, we often see coordination as a structural issue, the formal and planned connections that are established between colleagues and relief agencies. And although formal planning structures are important, we found that informal, emergent coordination processes were much more effective in the context of disaster reconstruction. Every successful project had some sort of informal site, like a food truck or cafe, where the quote-unquote real work of coordination happened outside of formal meetings. Second, we tend to think of stakeholder participation as more of an outcome, a box to check when local citizens are adequately informed or merely allowed to attend public meetings. But we found stakeholder participation to be much more effective when it entailed meaningful involvement throughout the reconstruction planning process, especially in the early phases of planning, like when reconstruction needs are prioritized and building sites are identified. This involved local citizens who were actual collaborators in housing project designs, not just seen as obligations that were entitled to information after decisions were already made. And finally, training homeowners on safe design and maintenance of their new houses was key to sustaining these structures long after the relief agencies left. Training worked best when it was hands-on, when homeowners observed and were directly involved in the reconstruction projects, and when the training was aligned with local customs and knowledge, not technocratic jargon. So the big lesson from our research is that we can develop resilient and sustainable infrastructure systems if we're willing to rethink some of the conventional wisdom around coordination, stakeholder participation, and training, focusing more on emergent practices, meaningful involvement, and local knowledge. Of course, we have much more to say about this research, so if you want to learn more, be sure to check out our project website. Just click on the link below. Our goal is to enhance the work of housing reconstruction after natural disasters. Even in the midst of tragedy, we can still work together and develop a more resilient and sustainable future.
Okay, so that is the video for disaster reconstruction. Okay, so we've reached the end of our lesson for today. Thank you for watching the video, NSTP students, and I hope that you've learned something from our lesson. Okay, lalong-lalo na that our country is very marami tayong disasters na nakakaharap every single year. So for now, let us have the second activity or the assignment for for our students. So please watch the continuation of the video explanation for your assignment. So it involves the preparation of the kit, no, or go bag for your own houses. Um, Go to the video of Ma'am Rose Ann Pa-alisbo. She will explain to you how to do the go bag raid. And so that's all. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.